You're listening to the Color Country Podcast, your passport to the breathtaking public lands and tourism destinations nestled in southern Utah and northern Arizona. Join host Tiffany DeGraw and her guests.
Hi, and welcome to the Color Country Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany DeGraw, and today we're talking with the Zion Forever Project and what they've got going on with their 2024 field guide. Hi, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Stephanie. My name's Tiffany Stouffer, and I'm the Director of Development, and I'm really excited to share kind of an update and share with the listeners the work we have ongoing across our parks here in southern Utah.
Great. And can you provide an overview of some of the key projects that are highlighted in the 2024 field guide that just came out?
But some of the high-level projects we kind of have ongoing across our parks include an update on the Cedar Breaks Visitor Center, which is opening this August, which is really exciting. Some of the ongoing work with our education programs in Zion and across our parks. And also our new partnership and the projects happening with the Dixie National Forest over on Pine Valley and up on Cedar Mountain. And so just a wide variety of project types and activities that our organization helps support here for recreation access and for people of all ages.
And if people want to check out some of these projects, why don't you share the website?
Yeah, so you can find a copy digitally of the field guide at www.zionpark.org. There you can also kind of do a deep dive into the individual projects. We push updates on our website, so as the projects are underway, you can kind of see how things are going and the progress we've made together. And then you're also able to support those specific projects if you so choose.
Yes, that's wonderful. And donations are always welcome for this great work. And in general, we'll get down to some of the specifics a little bit later in the podcast. But when you talk about the field guide and what the primary goals and objectives are of that field guide, what would you say about that?
So there's kind of two main goals with the field guide. The first one is to really create awareness of the need that our parks have. So annually, each of our parks that we sponsor, Zion National Park, Cedar Breaks National Monument, Pipe Spring National Monument, and now the Dixie National Forest, submit projects that they know they need funding for. These are things that go above and beyond what the federal government is able to provide. And so we kind of use the field guide as like those high-line priority projects. So awareness is a big part of what the field guide is. The second goal with that is once we have the awareness and can tell those stories, it's raising the funds to help meet those needs. We're really blessed to live in such a gorgeous area where recreation is abundant, but making sure that access and availability and, proper recreation is all available is something that we really seek to do. And so this field guide helps us do that.
Absolutely. When you're looking at all the projects, there's so many things that still need to be done, maybe improved upon because they became older. I'm thinking like campgrounds and things can get out of date. And then you've got new needs like the new welcoming centers and visitor centers. How do you guys prioritize which projects to do each year?
So it's actually a really cool process. So how it works is we reach out to the park actually in the early fall and say, hey, what do you got ahead of you in this next year? And so what the park does is those division heads kind of meet and prioritize and rank and submit applications to our org. And we work in tandem with the forest supervisor and with the park superintendent to then look at the list of applications and say, hey, these are projects that'll be really successful as storytelling pieces and awareness pieces, or maybe we could apply for funding through grants or speak to donors specifically one-on-one because the project might be geared a little bit more towards like one person's specific interest. And so what you get in the field guide is kind of that highest priority of work, but also the widest breadth of the work that we fund. There are so much more that the Zion Forever Project does outside of the cover of this book and outside of the pages. But this is what kind of is the best storytelling pieces and also the most understandable to donors and organizations that we work with for grants or funding.
And also, I would add maybe just also so that the public can understand some of these key things that you guys do. And what role does the public support and donations play in the success of all these projects?
So the really cool thing that sometimes the public doesn't know when you visit one of our parks, especially if you're taking your grandkids or your kids, like The educational experience is super important. Whether it's a night sky program up at Cedar or the holiday celebration down at Pipe Spring, or even just going to Zion as a school field trip. All of those things are made possible because of donor support. So the federal government is unable to pay for all of those services and all of the staffing needs, the material needs, the bus fees, all of that. And so anytime you basically have an interaction with a Zion, Cedar Breaks, Pipe Spring, any of those three parks, like an interpretive ranger, that's made possible because of the fundraising that our organization provides. And so it's really cool. And, if you think of the last time you visited one of our parks, there's a good chance you had, a search and rescue encounter or an educational program that you attended. That's made possible through our work.
Yes, and I think a lot of people don't understand. They pay a fee to get into most national parks, and they think, oh, that should cover everything around here. Why is this campground falling apart? Why do they need to have funds to, for example, one of my favorite programs you guys do where you bus children from low-income areas up to the park because in their normal day-to-day lives, they really don't have exposure to public lands. And so that's one of the goals of me having you on today, which is great, is to get the awareness out there of what your organization does and some of these cool projects and how we can help you.
Absolutely.
And let's jump over into a cool thing that's new this year. And I believe this is the first year that you're working with the Forest Service so in-depthly.
Yeah.
That's the word.
So we are really excited to now be an official partner of the Dixie National Forest. That was a new addition this year. So much of our public lands, they all kind of intersect, right? And most visitors don't realize that they're going from a Park Service land to Forest Service land. And sometimes the recreation rules are different. Sometimes, OHVing is allowed in the Forest Service land, but it's not in a park setting. And so it can sometimes be confusing to the visitor. And so one of the areas that we really see that happening is here locally on Pine Mountain. And so we actually are operating now the Heritage Visitor Center there at Pine Valley and celebrated a great heritage weekend there on Saturday. But we see that kind of crossover of people who aren't maybe familiar with our work, but expanding now in the Forest Service. And then the project this year in the field guide done in tandem with the Forest Service. So a couple of winters back, the roof blew off actually of the historic tower up on Brian Head Peak. And so we are working with the community, with the Forest Service, with the Park Service to replace and reinforce that roof structure. And so this is the first time a real tangible project is being done in partnership with the Forest Service. But we're really excited about it because it is kind of that overlook or lookout space. And you can see Zion, you can see all of the public land here in Utah, or in southern Utah, I should say, from that peak and that overlook site. And so it's a really cool way to kind of honor the legacy of the Forest Service on Cedar Mountain while also preserving it for generations to come.
And when you guys decided to come together, was there any other projects that have been discussed as a result of this partnership? You just mentioned two. I'm just kind of curious if there might be future projects we can look forward to.
Absolutely. And so I'm actually working with the Pine Valley Rangers right now on a couple of grants for OHV trail maintenance and infrastructure updates over towards Enterprise Reservoir. We're in talks about how we can help enhance their educational programming offerings and make them a little bit more robust. And also just, signage updates, trail maintenance across all of our lands. And again, that increased awareness of the need that exists, not only with our Park Service lands, but with the Forest Service as well.
Well, and there's so many projects. I bet you don't run out of things to
No,
tackle.
and I absolutely love
fun.
it. Every day I kind of get a look at either one of these projects in the field guide or, check my emails and there's a ranger reaching out like, hey, I have this great idea. How can we make it happen? And so I get the pleasure to get to kind of sift through it all and find those stories to tell the public. And it's really rewarding.
That is great. And now, if we want to jump over to something else, there's a couple of other projects that I've been wondering about. Can you explain the Floor of the Valley Trail initiative? And that's over in Zion National Park.
Yeah, so that is going to be a long legacy project. It's kind of combining and addressing two needs that exist in the main canyon. So if you've ever traveled up the main canyon,
Oh, yes.
Seasonally it's shuttle buses, but there are a lot of people who now like to rent e-bikes or ride bikes up and down the canyon. And so that traffic combined with the bus traffic can be pretty dangerous. And so one of the two things that project is addressing is getting pedestrians and bikes off of that main road and providing them a way to access the Temple of Sinawava without sharing the road and just making it safer for everyone involved. The second need that project really helps address is sewage infrastructure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You jump from...
So if you've been up to the Temple of Sinawava recently, there's a lot of porta potties up there. That is a big cost to maintain and update and keep those porta potties as fresh as possible in the summer heat. So the other part that trail will hopefully help and allow for is creating a new sewage line and updating existing sewage line from where the lodge is as well to make it so it can handle a larger amount. And the trail will hopefully, if it works out, be built on top of it. And so it won't have to disturb new land since that's already going to be land that has to be disturbed for the sewage infrastructure. And so it's kind of a two-for of a project, but it's one that requires some serious engineering and planning. And we know the federal government can sometimes be slow. So it's one we're really excited about, but know that it'll take place probably in chunks or phases.
Right. So it's just starting now to really gel together.
Yes.
If I understand correctly, as far as the steps that will happen to make it a reality, whereas I've heard talk about it for a few years. It's exciting that now we've got some actual steps of here's how we're going to make it happen. And what's interesting is that needs to happen, but also at the same time, that's different from the fact that Zion will be getting some new road alignments up by the south entrance to help the traffic flow, and we have so many visitors. So a lot of things are going to be happening at Zion National Park to handle all of the infrastructure and the visitation and the traffic. And especially, you brought up a good point that now on top of hikers and people that like to stroll up the road and travel up the road in their car or ride the bus, we now also have e-bikes added into the equation, and they've become so popular, whereas I remember before I never had heard of an e-bike. It's a new phenomena.
It was definitely a growth kind of during COVID when they weren't running the shuttles as full. And so people found it as an alternative way to get up there and also be able to recreate a little bit more in isolation. And so it kind of became a thing in 2021 and continues to grow. And, the park is really working with the town and with some of those retail locations in town to provide appropriate safety messaging for riders, make sure that it's consistent with map usage and things like that. But this project will really help address some of those concerns and hopefully make the park a safer place for everybody.
Absolutely. And it's amazing challenges and then the creative ways that the park and also your organization come up with to help manage these challenges. And speaking of trails, looks like you're going to be extending another popular trail, and I'll let you pronounce it.
Yeah, the Parus. So that's the current multi-use trail that runs from the visitor center to where the turn is for the Canyon Road that goes down to the Temple of Sinawava. And so that extension will be built. That's all part of that Floor of the Valley Trail project.
Okay, so it ties into that as well.
It's the extension of that trail.
You'll have the extension of that trail, but then you'll also have another trail.
They'll be kind of meeting. It's the same trail, but it's called two different things depending on, one is more focused on the trail work and one's more focused on the sewage line.
Okay.
And again, telling that sewage story is sometimes you don't think about it, but when you have millions of visitors, that's a lot of waste.
Yes, somebody's got to deal with it. It's
Absolutely.
not what I want to deal with, but I'm really grateful there are people that handle those kind of complications.
Absolutely.
And so is that the trail also that goes up to the Narrows?
Yeah, so that all will feed in. So that's that road all the way up to the Narrows, and that's where you kind of put in for the Narrows is at that end of the road.
Yes.
And so that Parus will run from the visitor center all the way once it's fully completed.
Well, that's exciting because that's going to really make it a consistent way to travel through the canyon.
Absolutely.
Is to say, I'm going to walk that whole trail. For me, it'd take me 5 weeks, but the average person, how many miles?
Well, I'm not entirely sure. Don't quote me on it, but I think it'll end up being, because I think from Canyon Junction to Temple of Zinawava, it's around 8 or 9, but the Park Service will know for sure. So you'll have to double check with them.
I'll check on that.
It'll be a long one, but it'll be good.
So there's 2 really parts to this project. Do you have any idea of a time frame of when it might start to happen, like some of the first steps?
So that's all kind of being undertaken by our park partner. We're just responsible for the funding portion. We're really excited that there's the growing momentum to do some of the feasibility studies, and they've been doing a really good job of tracking the need. And so we're optimistic phase 1 will kind of be underway in the next year or so, because like I said, it'll happen in chunks. It's not going to happen all in one fell swoop. It's a lot of land and it's a lot of area that'll need to be kind of constructed on. But we're very optimistic that, things could be underway much sooner than how the federal government sometimes works.
Well, and thanks to you guys, you kind of help it.
We're kind of pushing it along and,
I love that.
Working with some of our partners and some of our donors to find the resources to make the studies happen and to make sure we have all the right people at the table as these decisions are being made.
And that's a good point that you bring up, that there are all these wonderful ideas and improvements that need to be made, but there's a process.
Yes.
So the first has to be the studies and the public input and all of that. Mm-hmm. But it's wonderful that it's launching and going in that direction to address some of these things.
Absolutely.
Well, let's jump over the new Cedar Breaks Visitor Center. I'm excited about that because that's something that has really been a need with so many people discovering that area. Zion sometimes overshadows some of the areas, but this is such a beautiful, special place. Let's talk about that.
Cedar Breaks has been a long time in the making. We were again, I use the term blessed. We got a lot of snow the last few years, which ended up delaying the project by almost an entire year. But we're really excited to be opening that new visitor center this fall in August. We're really excited to be able to have programming there. There's going to be an updated bookstore there, and it's at the Point Supreme Overlook. So I'm not sure how familiar you might be with that, but that overlook and the old historic cabin are still preserved there, and the cabin will serve as like a little mini museum to the site, and they'll be able to do night sky programming there again. And I actually was just up at the site probably 2 weeks ago and got to go out and see everything. There's a really nice patio out back for educational programming. It's just going to be a really wonderful new facility that was made possible by state support, the federal government support with the Centennial Challenge, and so many of our donors and advocates saying, hey, we need to get this done. And so we're really excited to be celebrating it this year.
That's wonderful. And there will be like a parking lot as well that you can pull off and then get out and see the historic cabin and then go in and see the visitor center, which I'm sure will have some really interesting information and displays.
Absolutely. They're actually going to it's going to be like one of the trees is the central beam. And so it's being designed so that it brings the outdoors in. And so that's pretty cool.
That is cool and very unique. So let's talk about another cool program that you guys do already at these national parks and monuments that you support. Let's talk about how you're going to expand the dark sky education.
So the night sky is a resource. Just like the plants or the trees or the animals in a park, the night sky is just as valuable. And in fact, sometimes is even more valuable because it is under threat due to light pollution. And so one of the things that, Cedar Breaks specifically has been doing really well for a long time is having phenomenal night sky programming. Zion is a little bit more unique due to the number of visitors we have in the park and the fact that the night sky is kind of cut off by the canyon walls. You get a more limited night sky, but it is a really cool opportunity for millions of visitors to connect with a resource that they might not have at home. We take the night sky for granted. So many of us live in areas that have quite a bit of light pollution. And here in southern Utah, there are still like little islands of really dark skies. And so people can go to those programmings and experience something that not everyone gets to see. Zion's in its discovery phase, figuring out what's going to work best for it, because it is a big park with different needs than Cedar Breaks. And then down at Pipe, they've really done a great job of blending some of the indigenous night sky heritage in with Western night sky storytelling. And so they've really worked to kind of make a comprehensive and cohesive story of the importance of this resource. And so it's really unique. Each park has kind of attacked night sky programming differently and been very intentional about how it's presented and how it gets shared with the visitors from around the world.
Now you make me want to go to all three night sky events.
I am a huge fan of them.
They're so unique. I think a lot of people don't realize that the night sky really affects our animals.
It definitely plays a part in animals, but even us humans. Like, we need darkness to sleep. Our brains don't like to rest without it. And so the night skies, well, they are amazingly beautiful and really unique. And, you know, you can really capitalize or focus on different areas when you're at one of our different parks. It's still really important in your own backyard and in your own home.
Exactly. Yes, and we even as humans need to have dark skies to get a good night's sleep. I've really noticed that myself, that sometimes if it's any kind of artificial light coming through a window and it's too bright, I put the pillow over my head because it's so annoying.
Yeah. And that's one of the cool things. So when people go to those programs, they can take that little bit of the park and that knowledge back with them on how they could maybe make improvements to the lighting at their house or improvements, advocacy to their neighborhood or towns about how to be a little bit more dark sky conscious.
Definitely. And I know a couple of years ago, the town of Springdale was awarded a dark sky designation, but they had to go through a lot of revamping to make sure that the lights that are already in town were not too bright. And so that was an interesting process as well. Well, let's jump over to another subject that I think is really cool. You guys are going to do some mountain lion research and the significance of that animal in the Zion ecosystem. Please tell me about that.
First off, mountain lions are an animal you don't see generally in our parks. It is incredibly rare.
I was surprised because I thought there was some cats, but not, in my mind, is the mountain lion the bigger cat?
Yes.
Okay.
It is kind of the apex predator of the park system, specifically Zion. And so you'd have to talk to the experts to get a full lot of detail, but this project specifically is really interesting because in the past we've studied the prey animals. So the mule deer and the bighorn sheep and kind of looked at and tracked those animals and their habits. This will be the first time in a number of years where the Park Service will be going out and collaring the cats
themselves.
And so,
Okay,
they'll be collaring them to kind of see where their habitats kind of are and where they're interacting with their prey. And, you know, are they in areas we didn't anticipate or have they moved since the last time a study was done? Just looking at all of those factors. It's great to have them in our parks. They really do help with population control of the game animals and keeping the herds healthy. You sometimes don't think about that. It's like, oh, the poor bighorn or oh, the poor mule deer, but that's important to
nature balances itself out, right?
Exactly. But we want to make sure, and with this study, making sure not only that we kind of know how many mountain lions are in the area, but where they're at. So if we need to update signage or update maps to reflect that for visitors, we can also be aware of it. But it's usually the prey animals you study. It's not usually the big cats. And I don't know that they technically classify as a big cat in terms of correct terminology. But, you know, it's a unique perspective that we'll be able to get with this study.
Absolutely. And I'm excited to get with some of the wildlife biologists later this year and do a more in-depth story about this project and also about the cats themselves. And do you know, is that going to be starting soon?
Zion National Park is working with a expert who has done similar studies in Arizona and New Mexico, I believe. And so he's lending his expertise to help do this study here in our park.
Wonderful.
And so it's a really cool and unique opportunity for, again, to see what's going on with the mountain lions because we're not really sure.
Well, they're not out there where you can see them.
No, and they're pretty good hiders.
Yes, they definitely want to be left alone and do their thing. So I think it's going to be so fascinating to find out. Like you said, maybe they used to be in one area of the park, but with all our visitation, I'm wondering if it's pushed it
to somewhere else.
Someplace else. And so And do they go in and out of the park? I'm wondering.
And that'll be really interesting. Are they in Springdale, or are they headed over towards Orderville or on the east side? Like, we're not really sure where they're at.
And how many?
And we also are not sure about that either.
So that's going to be a really cool project.
I'm excited to have you talk with the biologists. They're such experts and have all the great info.
Well, believe me, I've been trying to actually talk to them this summer, but they are really busy. And this is the time of year where they're out in the field doing their studies, like projects like this. And so definitely I'll be following up with them. And that leads me into the question of how can we as the public get involved if we want to be like a volunteer, or what else can we do to help you guys out?
So there's a couple ways you can get involved. So the Park Service does have volunteers in park. And so if you go online to the NPS website, there's an opportunity to volunteer, and they'll kind of connect you with the volunteer coordinator to help do stuff in the parks themselves. The Forest Service has something very similar if you're interested in doing work at Pine Valley or Cedar Mountain. In terms of how you can help Zion Forever Project, there's a couple of ways you can help us give back to this work. So the first is obviously make a donation, and you can do that at www.zionpark.org. We also operate all of the retail store locations in Zion, Cedar Breaks, Pipe Spring, and at Pine Valley. And so whenever you make a purchase, the proceeds from those purchases go back to support these programs and so many others. The other way I would say is just be an advocate. If you see us boothing at a local event, come say hi, sign up to be a part of our newsletter, and learn about the work we're doing. You can always stop by our offices and pick up a copy of the field guide, or check us out online and just know what's kind of going on and share it out, because we would love to have your support and all things. And it's just such phenomenal work that impacts so many people here, and it's really important.
Definitely. And I think it's wonderful that if you have like a special area that you're interested in, or you're not sure what you maybe other things that we even haven't had a chance to talk about, find out if there's an area that interests you, because as a volunteer, you're going to have that passion to donate those hours to the organization that really has done so much for Zion National Park and the other places that we talked about. So I would really encourage people to check out your website and sign up for the newsletter so they can know all of the projects that would be interesting enough that you might want to volunteer. And I know volunteers are so important because you don't have to commit a lot of time, but any little bit of extra time you can donate to a nonprofit such as yours is so helpful and so amazing to help these wonderful public lands that we all enjoy so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, for helping us share some of the work we have going on and show the work off that we help make possible in our public lands. So
yes, and it's fun because I think a lot of people don't realize how much the nonprofits like yours can really preserve what we have so that we'll have it for future generations. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. This has been the Color Country Podcast.
You've been listening to the Color Country Podcast. Enjoy your public lands and remember to leave no trace.